You think they move faster because they work harder.
They don't. They just stopped depending on effort alone. They stopped rebuilding everything with their hands. They stopped solving the same problem from the beginning. They stopped confusing motion with progress. That is the difference you keep missing. From the outside, it looks like speed, it looks like momentum, it looks like talent. But most of the time, it is structure. It is placement. It is advantage built before the work even starts. You are looking at the visible part, the action, the output, the result. You are not looking at what is underneath it, the position, the system, the leverage. So you compare your strain to their result, and it feels unfair because you are using force, and they are getting distance. But force and distance are not the same thing. You can strain for hours and barely move. Someone else can make one correct move and change the entire outcome. That is not luck. That is not magic. That is not cheating. That is what happens when effort is attached to something that multiplies it. Every action they take connects to something. A network, a reputation, a skill stack, a process, a position they built earlier. So when they move, they are not moving alone. Their past work is moving with them. That is why it looks easier, because it is. Not easier because they are soft, easier because they stopped relying on brute force. You are still carrying the full weight yourself, every time. You restart the machine by hand. You rebuild momentum from zero. You spend energy creating what should already exist. And that keeps you tired, not just physically, strategically, because exhaustion hides patterns. When you are always pushing, you do not step back. When you do not step back, you do not see the design. So you keep doing more hours, more pressure, more output. But more is useless when nothing compounds. That is the part that separates people, not effort, compounding effort. The ability to make one action support the next. The ability to build something once and benefit from it again. The ability to stop trading time for every result. The people moving faster are not always stronger than you. They are often less wasteful than you. They are not burning energy everywhere. They are not restarting every morning. They are not solving solved problems. They build a base, then they move from it. They build a tool, then they use it again. They build trust, then opportunities come to them faster. They build skill, then fewer mistakes slow them down. That is why their effort travels farther, because it has something to travel through. Yours keeps hitting the ground and dying there. This is why hard workers often feel bitter. They know they are trying. They know they are sacrificing. They know they are carrying weight. But they do not understand why someone else is still advancing faster. And without understanding leverage, they create the wrong story. They say the world is unfair. They say other people got lucky. They say results are fake. They say shortcuts are dishonest. No, some people just learned how not to live by force alone. Once you understand that, your entire view changes. You stop admiring visible struggle. You stop worshipping exhaustion. You stop measuring value by how drained you feel at the end. You start asking better questions. What keeps working after I stop? What carries weight for me? What removes friction instead of proving how much I can endure? That is where speed actually begins. Not in effort, in structure. Not in pressure, in leverage. Not in doing more with your hands, in building something that keeps moving when your hands are off it.
Most people don't fall behind because they're lazy.
They fall behind because they're positioned wrong. They start from zero every single time. They wake up, push, work, try, and at the end of the day, nothing carries forward. Nothing builds, nothing compounds, nothing stays. So tomorrow feels exactly the same. Not because they failed, but because nothing stacked. This is the invisible trap. You think you're progressing, but you're just repeating effort without accumulation. And repetition without accumulation is just controlled stagnation. It feels productive, but it leads nowhere because nothing is being built beneath the action. Look closely at how most people operate. They complete tasks, but they don't create systems. They solve problems, but they don't eliminate them. They work hard, but they don't reduce future effort. So everything costs them again. Time, energy, focus. Every single day. The ones moving faster stopped paying full price. Not because they cheat, but because they design. They build once, then reuse. They learn once, then apply across everything. They struggle once, then remove the need to struggle the same way again. That is accumulation. That is compounding. That is how effort starts stretching. You don't need more effort. You need effort that stays. Effort that connects. Effort that carries forward. Right now, you are spending everything you produce and wondering why nothing grows. It's the same pattern as money. If everything you earn is used immediately, you never build anything. Effort works the same way. If every action disappears after it's done, you stay in survival mode, working, resetting, working again, with no real expansion. But the moment something starts staying, everything changes. A system removes a repeated task. A skill reduces mistakes. A connection opens doors faster. A process saves time. Now, effort is no longer isolated. It starts stacking. It starts multiplying. That's when speed appears. Not because you're rushing, but because less is being wasted. Less restarting. Less rebuilding. Less unnecessary friction. So every step you take actually moves you forward. This is where most people break, because this requires a different mindset. Not, how do I do more? But, how do I make this last? How do I build something from this? How do I reduce the cost next time? That is not how most people think, which is why most people stay stuck. They chase effort instead of building leverage. They chase movement instead of direction. And direction is what actually determines distance. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. Every action becomes a question. Does this disappear, or does this stay? That question changes everything. If this message resonates with you, like and subscribe for more content like this. This channel is built for people who want control over their focus, not constant noise. Once you understand this, you start seeing why most people stay stuck. Not because they lack effort, but because they keep placing effort in the wrong place. They invest into things that don't return, time that disappears, energy that resets, actions that don't carry forward. And the worst part? It feels like progress because they're busy, because they're moving, because they're trying. But none of it builds. So the outcome never changes. Only the exhaustion does. Look at the pattern. You take action. You get a small result. Then it fades. You repeat the process, and it fades again. There is no accumulation, no stacking, no structure holding anything in place. So everything depends on you showing up again. Every result requires fresh effort, which means the moment you slow down, everything slows down with you. That's not progress. That's dependency. You've built a system where nothing survives without you, and that keeps you trapped. The people moving ahead, they're not tied to that loop anymore. They build things that continue, even when they're not actively pushing. A process keeps running. A skill keeps reducing friction. A network keeps opening access. A reputation keeps creating opportunities. Everything they built keeps working. So they don't just move when they act, they move even when they pause. That is leverage. And once leverage enters the equation, effort changes completely. It's no longer about how hard you push. It's about where that push lands. A small action in the right place can outperform massive effort in the wrong one. That's why some people look like they're barely trying, but still advancing faster than everyone around them. They are not wasting movement. They are placing it precisely. Every action connects to something. Every step reinforces the next. You can't compete with that using effort alone, because effort without leverage has limits. You get tired. You burn out. You slow down. But leverage doesn't get tired. Leverage keeps working. That's the shift you need to make. Not more effort, better placement. Start looking at everything you do through that lens. Does this build something? Does this reduce future cost? Does this carry forward? If it doesn't, you're just spending energy. And spending energy without building anything is how people stay stuck for years. You don't need to do more. You need to stop wasting what you already do. Because once your effort starts stacking, speed is no longer something you chase. It becomes something that happens. And that's when everything separates. There's a point where effort stops being the problem, and placement becomes everything. Because once you see how leverage works, you realize something uncomfortable. Most of what you've been doing was never meant to scale. It was only meant to survive the moment. Tasks that expire, effort that disappears, energy that solves today but leaves tomorrow untouched. That's why it feels like you're always behind. Not because you're slow, but because nothing you do is carrying forward. So every day starts heavy. Every task feels manual. Every result feels temporary. And over time, that drains you. Not just physically, mentally, strategically. Because deep down, you start realizing something isn't adding up. You're doing enough. Sometimes more than enough. But the outcome isn't reflecting it. And that creates friction, doubt, frustration. Not because you're incapable, but because you're misaligned. Effort is being applied, just not in places that return. And effort without return always feels like loss. So people respond the wrong way. They try to push harder, add more hours, increase pressure. But pressure on the wrong structure doesn't create progress. It just creates strain. and strain eventually breaks you. This is where awareness becomes critical, because once you recognize the pattern, you stop reacting emotionally and start adjusting structurally. You begin pulling back from constant motion, not to slow down, but to see clearly. Where is your effort going? What is it producing? And more importantly, what is it leaving behind? Because if nothing remains, nothing grows. That's the rule. Not effort, not motivation, not intensity, accumulation. If something doesn't accumulate, it cannot scale. And if it cannot scale, it will always depend on you, your time, your energy, your presence. That is the ceiling most people never break, because they never shift out of that dependency. They build lives that require constant input instead of systems that reduce it. And once that pattern locks in, years pass. Effort stays high. Results stay limited. Not because of effort, but because of structure. That's the correction. Not doing more, but building differently. Because once structure changes, everything else follows. Effort becomes lighter. Movement becomes cleaner. Progress becomes visible. Not instantly, but consistently. And consistency built on the right structure is what actually moves you forward.
At some point,
You stop asking why things feel hard. And you start asking a different question. Why does this keep costing me so much? Because that's the real signal, not difficulty, cost. Time, energy, focus. What you have to give just to move forward. And if the cost stays high forever, you never actually get ahead. You just survive longer. That's what most people build without realizing it. A system of survival, not a system of growth. Everything they do works, but only in the moment. Nothing reduces the next step. Nothing carries forward. So progress feels temporary, because it is. But once you see this clearly, you can't go back to operating the same way. You stop respecting effort by itself. You stop admiring how hard something feels. You stop measuring your days by exhaustion, and you start measuring something else. What stayed? What improved? What became easier because of what I did? That shift is everything, because now you're not just acting, you're building. And building changes the timeline. What used to take hours starts taking minutes. What used to drain you barely touches you, because the weight is no longer sitting on you. It's sitting inside the structure you created. That's when progress stops feeling forced, not because you're doing less, but because less is being wasted. And when less is wasted, more is kept, more stacks, more compounds. That's where separation happens, quietly, over time. Not in one big moment, but in what continues after the moment is over. So if you've been feeling stuck, if you've been pushing and not seeing it reflect, stop asking how to push harder. Ask what you're building. Ask what stays. Ask what reduces the cost next time. Because once your effort starts staying, everything changes. Speed changes. Clarity changes. Direction changes. And the gap you thought was about effort reveals itself. It was always about structure. If this shifted your perspective, Pay attention to what you're building next, because that's what determines everything that follows. And if you're ready to move differently, stay with this. There's more coming.